It's now time for Panic or Purchase. We're telling you about some guys that are either in some struggling situations or coming off a big game, and should you be buying it, maybe selling it, kind of like a little buy a sell segment, but a little different way to frame it and phrase it. So we'll start with Geno Smith, who's coming off 2 subpar fantasy games, 2 games under 20 fantasy points, and now he's taking on a Giants defense that has been good against opposing quarterbacks, and he may not have DK Metcalf. So Heath, I'll start with you. Are you panicked about Geno Smith, or are you purchasing him as a guy that can bounce back and play well in this game?
I'm closer to panic than I am to purchase. Mostly, I think he's going to be a high-end number 2 quarterback most likely rest of season. I don't like the fact that he doesn't have DK Metcalf this season, and the fact that Ken Walker's been so good running the ball. We've really only seen one big pass attempt game from Geno Smith. He's been 30 attempts or lower in the rest of those games. So I think he's more of a QB2 rest of the season.
I would agree for this week. We'll see what happens when Metcalf is back, assuming he is out this week. Again, has not been ruled out yet, so just something to keep an eye on there. Adam, let's talk about Jonathan Taylor, who did have 14 PPR points in week number 7, but there's a quarterback change, and not the easiest of matchups coming up against the Washington Commanders in week number 8. So Taylor is somebody you're most likely going to still start, but are you panicked about him reliving or living up to the expectations of being a top 5 overall pick, number 1 overall pick? Are you purchasing him, though, maybe if somebody's looking to sell or looking to buy low on Jonathan Taylor with the idea that maybe you can get him for a little bit cheaper than clearly he was ever going to be this year?
Right. People are going to value him very, very differently. I just traded him in one of the leagues that I have him in. I got Ken Walker back. It was part of a bigger deal, but I am more on the panic side. I would say that I expect Jonathan Taylor to play like a mid to late second-round pick in a 12-team league, so not necessarily a top 20 overall player. I'd rather have Josh Allen than Jonathan Taylor. I'd rather have Jalen Hurts than Jonathan Taylor. So, that's kind of where I'm at. I think they have one of the worst offensive lines in football. PFF has them as the 30th best run blocking team. I think they're going to run the ball more, and I think his catches are going to go down. I don't have any faith in Sam Ehlinger. That could be the wild card here. If he's good, then I might be wrong, but I'm lowering my expectations big time on Jonathan Taylor.
Makes a lot of sense. Hopefully he starts to rebound. Last year at this time is when he started to take off and was an MVP candidate, but clearly the circumstances have changed. The Colts are actually probably longing for Carson Wentz at this point. Aaron Jones just had 28 PPR points, Heath, and it was his first big game really since week 2. Did have a 14-point game in there, but lacking rushing touchdowns. We know this offense is struggling right now, and we've said this, that he's the guy that we trust the most. But is this a sell high opportunity on Aaron Jones, knowing that he did just have this huge game and had largely underperformed prior to that?
Yeah, I think it's more of a purchase, but maybe purchase after this game against the Bills, because I don't expect a great performance against the Bills. I'm still starting him, but you just look, the fact that Aaron Rodgers has Allen Lazard hurt now, he obviously is not very pleased with any other wide receivers. He just threw the ball 10 times to Aaron Jones, which is kind of something we were hoping was going to happen more often throughout the season. I expect Jones to be better rest of the season than he's been so far this year. I would purchase.
Okay, so buying him and buying him high potentially, but as you said, maybe wait until after this game he struggles and then get him and hopefully get the great player for the rest of the season. Brandon Cooks has been a disappointment. Only 2 games with over 9 PPR points. Hasn't had one of those games since week 4. Coming off a game with 5 targets, 4 catches, 46 yards. He has a great matchup against the Titans, and Nico Collins a little bit banged up. He may not play. Is now the time to go get Brandon Cooks, or is this just going to be the type of player we're getting the rest of the season, the guy who has struggled more times than not?
Well, one thing we should point out with Cooks is that he's had a pretty tough schedule so far, and it's kind of mixed going forward, but I would say in sort of like a DJ Moore sense, where he can't be this bad forever, I think. You could purchase him, but I think Brandon Cooks is no better than a number 3 wide receiver. They're just a run team now. They run the heck out of the ball with Dameon Pierce. He's been very good. And prior to last week, Nico Collins got hurt. Nico Collins was leading the team in receiving. So I'm not excited about Brandon Cooks. If you can get him for very cheap as a number 3 wide receiver, you can purchase, but I am more panicking on Brandon Cooks.
This could be an opportunity also if you're expecting him to get traded. That's still a rumor that's out there that the Texans could move on from him. We'll see if maybe a team like the Packers come calling for a receiver that could certainly help their situation as well. Courtland Sutton has been very frustrating the last 2 weeks. We know the situation with Russell Wilson. He is expected to play in week 8 against the Jaguars in London, but for the last 2 weeks it's been a combined 8 PPR points. You called him a boomer bust fantasy option for this week, but with Russell Wilson, it's been basically 12 or more PPR points for the majority of the season. Is now the time to go get Sutton while he's a little bit cheaper, or you just maybe hands off this entire situation because it's been bad?
This one is as maybe more dependent on price than any other. If somebody's viewing him as a boom-bust number 3 wide receiver, then I'd be fine purchasing. I don't necessarily love him this week, but rest of season I could see him being a number 2. But there was a time for the first month and a half of the season where we were ranking this guy as a borderline top 12 guy. If he costs top number 2 wide receiver cost, then I'm probably out.
All right, so we'll see what happens in this game against the Jaguars, and then they have a bye in Week 9. So if you're going to get him, you might not be able to use him very much, depending on how much you trust Russell Wilson at this point. Last guy we're talking about here, Adam, is Zach Ertz, and we saw the first game with DeAndre Hopkins on the field, and it was bad for Ertz. Only 4 targets, 2 catches, 21 yards, his worst game of the season by far. Hopkins back. At some point, Marquise Brown's going to return as well. Is it time to panic on Zach Ertz, or is this a good time to get him while his value is a little bit depressed?
I'm in the purchase mode here. The Saints, that was last week's opponent, they're really good against tight ends. It was a bad week, and obviously the correlation with Hopkins, but did Hopkins really do anything all that differently than what Marquise Brown was doing? Marquise Brown was among the leaders in targets in the NFL. He was a top 12 PPR wide receiver, so he was really good, and Ertz was really good. They were able to run the ball pretty successfully for maybe the first time all season. That could have played into it, or just a bad game. It happens. So if Brown were healthy as well, I'd be panicking, but since it's only Hopkins, I'm going to purchase Zach Ertz.